Hello, everybody. My name is Rafael Chacín, as known as el Capitán Rafucho, and welcome everybody to another episode of Let Me Speak. We can talk about everything about topics of sports and entertainment with your host, Rafael Chacín, as known as el Capitán Rafucho, unfiltered, uncensored, and of course, no BS. And right now, we had a special guest right here. So you might know as one of those writers from the Mission Martial Arts who embarked with the UFC and another leagues from the Mission Martial Arts internationally. So right now, we got a special guest straight up for Germany, which is in close in era because the difference between the hours is kind of like crazy, but we had the opportunity and we had the patience right there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you a special guest from Germany, the Mr. Patrick McCorry. How's it going? Welcome to Let Me Speak. So, how's it going?
It's going really well, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right. So, first and foremost, we could talk about for the UFC 300, which is in Las Vegas. Now, I know the UFC has been going for the 30th anniversary, but you might know this April 2024 is going to be the UFC 300. And I know there's like a banging of bands, which in fact is gonna be like a really interesting one. And there's a lot of rumors going out for who's gonna be the main event of the UFC 300. So let's check them out for this right here. All right, so there's a couple of the bands that we're talking about it. So it's gonna happen of this one. So the first we got Justin Gage versus Matt Holloway for the BMF title. Also, they got Shelly Sham versus John Sheenan, Charles Oliveira versus Armand Tushkan, Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic, also Aljamain Sterling versus Colby Content. But you might think of them know about this, but who's gonna be the main event of the UFC 300? There's a lot of rumors going out for a possible coming back from McGregor, also Nate Diaz. Who do you think is gonna choose the main event of UFC 300, which is the biggest event on April 2024 in Las Vegas?
Man, it's really interesting because you look at the pay-per-view before that, UFC 299 is so stacked. I don't know if you've seen in the last hour and a half what's going on with Dustin Poirier and Benoit Saint-Denis. But so it's come out that that fight is canceled because it was never signed. And
Mhm.
so now it's could Dustin Poirier be part of the headliner for UFC 300? Maybe a fight with Nate Diaz or something like that if they're looking to go down that route. Like because that's a very fun fight for the fans and that's a capstone. Or are they looking down the traditional title fight sense? But then if you look at the card and you look at all the fights before that, it's really hard to single out one. For me, Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway could be the main event, and I would be very, very happy. But yeah, I'm not really sure who could be the main event. Who do you think could be the main event for UFC 300, or could let's say?
Yeah, it could be because there was a lot of rumors about a possible revenge, a possible backup between Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz. I mean, people didn't know about this because the feud between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz became like in 2016. But right now, 8 years later, I don't think it's gonna be like a really safe. It's gonna be like a possible comeback between Conor McGregor. I mean, it kind of happened because right now he's promoting this new movie called Raw House with Jake Gyllenhaal. I mean, there's a lot of speculations going out for is it gonna happen? Is it gonna be so? I would say that the Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz, but I think it is the most safely had to go for the main event for the UFC 300.
Yeah, I mean Conor McGregor comeback has to happen this year, and Conor McGregor did announce on New Year's that he was fighting Michael Chandler on UFC 303 on International Fight Week, but though that's kind of changed because Michael Chandler tweeted out hashtag UFC 300. So that could be a main event on UFC 300, Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. And I would be very interested in that. But I think with Conor McGregor's star power, the UFC is looking to put him on a card on his own, right? Conor McGregor's comeback has to happen. Nate Diaz is one that I think, again, the fans would really like, and it would be a very fun fight. But if you're looking for like to get the hardcore fans in and get a proper like high level fight, I think the UFC would look at Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. And they did the Ultimate Fighter season, so the UFC isn't gonna let a whole Ultimate Fighter season that they spent millions of dollars on just go to waste without that fight happening, right? I mean, there were so many face-offs between them, so much to drive on. It's already been a year since Ultimate Fighter, which seems crazy, but or well, not a year, but it's almost been a year. You know what I mean? So it's very interesting. I don't think the UFC would let a whole Ultimate Fighter season go to waste.
Yes. And speaking about that, because not only the UFC 300 is right there for the corner for an April 2024, but there's some thesis about for the return and possibly like a major return because we just see like a lot of social media going out there because we just teasing about the possible return from two UFC fighters when it came like it became like very important on that decade, which is 2020. So first they got Israel Adesanya, which known as the Stylebender, and the another one is a possible return of Khabib Nurmagomedov, because you might people know that he was like one of the undisputed fighters who sparked a generation at the UFC. So how you think it's gonna be like a possible return between Israel Adesanya before UFC and all these stuffs and a possible return of Khabib Nurmagomedov is going to be happening like during the UFC 300 or after the UFC 300 is going to be like possible return, is going to be comeback or is getting fully retired. About for the case of Khabib.
Well, I think it's more likely that Israel Adesanya comes back for UFC 300. He did post something on his story, I think last night about kind of teasing UFC 300. He posted a picture of the movie UFC 300 or 300, which is a great film. So that's got a lot of fans interested. Maybe another fight with Alex Pereira or Dricus du Plessis, the new middleweight champion. I think that's a fight that I want to see. There's already bad blood. Dricus du Plessis is a very exciting fighter. I think he can bring that dog out of Adesanya. I would be very happy with that. UFC 300. In terms of Khabib Nurmagomedov, I don't see him coming back. I've read multiple times that the UFC has offered him so much money to come back. He's just not interested, and it's even got to the point where he's gone away from coaching in MMA. I don't know if you've noticed, but he's not even in Islam Makhachev's corner or any of his cousins or family members or teammates' corners. He's done being a coach, or I think he's still in the gym, but in terms of being at the events, being a UFC fighter, he is done. I think that chapter is closed. I think, you know, over 3 years, going on 4 years this year, I think we have to close the door on Khabib Nurmagomedov, sadly.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, speaking about for Sean Strickland, who lost the title with Dricus du Plessis back in the day for the UFC 297, which is on Toronto, Ontario, and Canada. So my question is, who's gonna be the next opponent for Sean Strickland or Dricus du Plessis, as known as DDP, is gonna have like a title shot and everything? Because right now DDP is right now the new championship, which is very very shocking for everything. So I gotta tell you for this, who's gonna be the next contender from Sean Strickland, and of course, who's gonna defend the title for Dricus du Plessis after he just won the title against Sean Strickland?
Well, for Dricus du Plessis, I think he's going to be looking at Robert Whitaker versus Paulo Costa coming up at UFC 298. I think that's the one that is interesting him. But I do think Israel Adesanya, if the UFC is going to bring Adesanya back, I think that's the fight they have to make. All the African champion kind of stuff. I think the bad blood's reached a point where it has to be settled. And for Strickland as well, I think the winner of Paulo Costa versus Robert Whitaker is also a fight that makes sense. Another one that would make sense, but I do believe Vittoria and Strickland are teammates, would be the winner of Vittoria versus Brendan Allen for Sean Strickland. Even though Brendan Allen and Sean Strickland have fought before, Brendan Allen has been on a really good run recently, and Brendan Allen wants that fight back. Yeah, I think Strickland and Chris Curtis are the only people who have defeated him in a long, long time.
That's a good fight. I mean, it all depends, but because right now Sean Strickland has a very great career. Back in the end of 2023, he just won against Israel Zendaya, and then he was gonna like defend his title, but again, this is way harder to go for losing against Dricus du Plessis, which he made history as one of the fewest South African UFC fighters to make it to that point as championship. I mean, he's just looking to make it a spark and go for the new era. And I think that Sean Strickland has a very good potential, but it seems like there's hype is gonna be like a really good intense, but I think it's gonna happen between of those opponents are gonna come on that level. Because remember they because of against Iris Realens and Daya back way before. I mean, there has a lot of potential, but he has to be really careful about his career. Also, they had injuries. Also, about for the trash talking. I mean, yeah, that could happen for the career for Sean Strickland.
Well, I think for Adesanya is his legacy with his recent things. You know, he lost to Alex Pereira, then wins it back with one of the most viral moments in UFC history, and then losing to Sean Strickland. You know that has hurt his legacy. Also losing to Jan Blachowicz when he was trying to go up a weight class. You know, I think that has hurt his legacy. So I think for Israel Adesanya, having a fight that is personal again, like Dricus du Plessis, you know, they had their kind of square off in the cage after du Plessis knocked out Robert Whitaker. So for me, I think that is a fight that interests Adesanya more in terms of coming back. I think, you know, Adesanya will see that and be like, I want that fight. I want to settle the score. You know, people think that maybe I was like a lot of people are saying Adesanya was overrated. He wasn't as good as he was. Strickland or Adesanya wants to prove these guys wrong. Strickland is a super high level fighter, and he beats a lot of really great fighters. So I think Adesanya has no reason to hang his head. He was a champion for so long. So I think Adesanya wants to win the respect back. And I think beating a guy like Dricus du Plessis would definitely prove that on a card like UFC 300 that everyone in the world will be watching, you know? I think that's a perfect fight for Adesanya to come back. And I'll be honest, I think that's the most likely main event for UFC 300.
Yeah, that will be really interesting because imagine this because they had so few South African champions like Israel Sandaya, also DDP, Dricus du Plessis, but also it kind of like at a very impact of those American fighters like Colby Covington, Sean Strickland. I mean, they have a very important at the Spark Cup, also Matt Holloway, which is from Hawaii and everything. But I think this is gonna happen like a major event when it comes to up before UFC 300 because if you're gonna make it an impact, they have to go for a major impact. And of course, I have another question for you because right now we're going to like February, which is on Anaheim, California, which is UFC 298, which they have one of the biggest important things. One of those matches you can never forget. Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilya Topuria. I know that Ilya Topuria is from Germany, as known as for Halle, but he's had a nationality from Georgia and Spain. But also he just practicing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu of Greco-Roman live fights and also boxing. But during for the Alexander Volkanovski, he has a very great athleticism, but also he's just practicing rugby, which is a very popular sport in some countries in Europe and New Zealand, Australia, some of the kinds of Latin America. But I didn't see like a Ila Tuporia versus Alexander Volkanovski. It might be like a one of the biggest events that you can never miss. So how do you think about Alexander Volkanovski versus Ila Tuporia? It might be like a very great decision at all is going to be taken who's gonna be crowned as a new champion, and or Alexander Volkanovski get ahead like a defending this title of the UFC 298.
Well, that main event is probably the best fight you can make at featherweight at the moment. Volkanovski's been dominant for 4 years now. So, but again, like Israel Adesanya, people look at his loss to Islam Makhachev, losing a very close decision, and then taking the risk of going against Islam Makhachev again on 10 days' notice and getting head kicked inside the first round. People are like, is Volkanovski overrated? And if I know Volkanovski as a fan of his and someone who's watched him for so long, he's not going to take that, right? So immediately, 4 months later, he's going to take on the biggest hype train at featherweight, one of the best fighters at featherweight in Ilia Topuria, who dominates people. He knocks people out cold. That Jai Herbert knockout is terrifying. Look at what he did to Josh Emmett. He systematically broke him down. It was a brutal domination from Ilia Topuria. And there's a reason Ilia Topuria is 14-0 here, right? And Volkanovski, I don't know what to say, man. Volkanovski is the most complete fighter in the UFC, in terms of mixing the striking, and he's a very strong grappler. But Ilia Topuria, man, if you don't know, like people watch the striking and be like, "Oh, this guy's a striker." His base is Greco-Roman and Jiu-Jitsu. He is a ground fighter. When he gets people to the ground, watch the Bryce Mitchell fight. He is so good on the ground. So for me, I'm very interested to see how does Ilia Topuria want to take this fight? Where does he want to bring it? Because he's good everywhere, as is Volkanovski. I think it's a very equal fight. But for me, I do think Volkanovski retains the title. I think he can beat Ilia Topuria over fight. We've seen Topuria get a bit tired at times. We saw him against Jai Herbert. He got rocked quite badly by a head kick. And it took him a while to recover from that. So I think if Volkanovski can crack him early and he has to get started early. He has to beat Topuria to the punches. I think Alexander Volkanovski retains in Anaheim.
Yeah, that was like a great point. But I think if Bulk took like 6 months after the knockout would be like a decent enough to come back because some people had to still like
Yeah.
we have with the Dawn lately opinion, but I think this is what got it different. Taking like a show notice of the fight was considered like misstep at the time, but the battle for the finish. Because before the UFC back in there in October, there's gonna be like a sole planned fights in Saudi Arabia, but it took it like a short notice to have it took like short time to train him. But I think it's gonna watch it every sport had the obviously is too early. But I think it's gonna short notice against the now people doubted against the perfect contender. I mean think about for Ilya. He likely would have struck in a match who's been three against Volk at 3-0, but that has to go for it. It seems like I think it is a better bag for Volk. I mean, watching him with this because don't forget he just strike Madsen year. I mean, and Easy just lost to Strickland had a striking the knockout Pereira. I mean, that could be happening. I mean, Ilya throws bombs, but it's not a very good fight after coming up for a KO loss. But he has been doubted so many times that they pretty much did this battle. I mean, he can knock out for the best UFC fighter on the planet, but he's still bulk. He's still bulk, but he just sort of forget how looking incredible they finished against Jerry in July. I mean, literally 3, 4 months ago, that was the last time we decided for the full camp. And he took like 12 notices against our generational talent in Iceland with a higher weight. I mean, he called out for the beautiful kick, and that was very questionable. I mean, there has to be it's something about for those fights. It just happened like very unexpected, but they're just trying to get off of the next superstar. But they're just trying to get Bulk out of there and make Ilya one of the best superstar at the weight class because there's no way he should be the fight like 5 months out of being like Brody knockout. Because if someone's Bulk, the team shouldn't know still Bulk. I mean, they had the big check of the his friend. I mean, he started fight, but he's gonna get up at the fight age. So he had to try into the ban off as often as they can. But I hope it's gonna be early. It's just starting to decline. But I'm really worried about it. I mean, will it trust that happens to Ela for you without the semester step up for the competition? Because I don't think that knockout was really bad. I'm not saying that Islam is bail up, fisted, or drown striker checks didn't too much, but he has a very good recovery. To begin with, Islam, it's not very exactly a knockout machine, but the Fasten is sensation dog, it kind of like Berlinger for a while. They have to the smooth speed, the recovery during the training. I mean, especially if it's gone for a second that is not very much healthier but a few weeks, but not to mention this being older, but I think it's gonna be they want to be like very uncertain with those things.
But I think on the Islam Makhachev note, I do think his striking is very, very underrated, and he set up that head kick perfectly. And a head kick from a guy, I know he fights at 155, Islam Makhachev, but really he walks around like 185. He went into that fight heavier than Volkanovski. I think that kick would have knocked out anyone. It landed perfect on Alexander Volkanovski, and that's nothing on Volkanovski. And Volkanovski's recovery is amazing, but that kick would knock out any 155 or 145er at that in terms of Volkanovski. So, but as you were saying about the layoff time, man, 4 months, it's too short for me. I don't. That's the part that's making me nervous for this fight. That's why normally I'm so confident about picking Alexander Volkanovski, because he is Alexander Volkanovski. Maybe Volkanovski will prove me wrong, and he'll dominantly win again at featherweight. But it scares me that short notice after being knocked out like that is, you know, he went straight from that fight, straight from getting knocked out back into the gym. I mean, the Topuria fight was announced in what, December?
Yeah, that was
It's for me, it's too soon. I was hoping Volkanovski would stay away until June, July, maybe, international fight week. That's the kind of layoff, or UFC 300 even. The layoff I was hoping for Volkanovski, but as you said after the fight, without having a fight and without being active, he goes crazy. Um, Drives himself insane. So I think that was part of it. But
Mhm.
I don't like the time off, especially fighting a guy as dangerous as Ilia Topuria.
Yeah, yeah. And that's another great point about it. And of course, the last question for you, I mean, we had a short plenty about the time, Mr. Patrick McCorry. So on that certain notice, on 2024, who should be a future champion for the UFC? There is somewhere like a list of future champions that I want to see for those fans of 2024. There's Alessandro Pantoja. There's Sean O'Malley. There's Islam. There's Shakbat. Also, there's Dricus du Plessis, who won the title against Sean Strickland. Also, there's Aspinall. There's Pereira. Also, we want to see like a future champions who wants to define the title and a possible fights who can brace it about those fans watching the UFC and all these things for the 2024. So who do you think is gonna be a future championship for 2024 for the UFC, and who's gonna retain a title that we want to see like a little bit longer for that year?
In terms of champions by the end of the year, I think Alexandre Pantoja will maintain his title. I think he said he's going to be fighting in Brazil, in Rio. I think he said May. So I would guess it's Amir Albasi who he's fighting, who I think Pantoja does beat. And, Moreno and Royval are fighting each other. But Pantoja's beaten both those guys multiple times now. So I think Pantoja retains in terms of 135. Sean O'Malley retaining. I think there's a lot of animals at 135. I think Marab is probably one that I think it's inevitable that he wins the title if he gets past Henry Cejudo. I don't think there's anyone that can stop Marab Dvalishvili. Um, but at the same time, Sean O'Malley is a sniper. I think Cheeto Vera is very, very good.
Yeah.
He's dangerous. Cheeto Vera is a very, very dangerous man. I'm just going by division here. I would say Murad Dvalishvili is the champion by the end of the year. In terms of featherweight, I think it's between two. I think it's between Alexander Volkanovski and Movsar Evloev. Um, Movsar is very, very good. We saw that against Arnold Allen. I think if Ilia Topuria wins, it's more likely that Movsar gets a shot. If Volkanovski wins, I think they'll do Volkanovski versus Movsar, or sorry, I mean Ortega, the winner of Ortega versus Rodriguez versus Movsar Evloev, to then see
Yeah.
if Movsar is ready for Ilia Topuria, because Topuria and Movsar were supposed to fight a couple years ago, so there is still something in the water for that fight. 155, I think Islam Makhachev retains his title. I think he beats Charles Oliveira in a rematch and probably beats Justin Gaethje. 170, it's between Shavkat and Leon Edwards for me. I think it really depends. Does Shavkat now get the shot now, or will he face the likes of Colby Covington or something? 185, Dricus du Plessis could definitely retain the title against Israel Adesanya. I think it's du Plessis, or I would be interested in a rematch between Strickland and du Plessis personally, because that fight was very close. But I think there's a good chance du Plessis maintains the title for the rest of this year. 205, I think Pereira retains. I think he beats Jamal Hill and Magomed Ankalaev. And I believe Pereira's got a fight news coming soon. I think he's got a fight announcement coming soon. And heavyweight, it all depends on big Johnny Bones Jones. Does he choose to fight this year? Will he fight Stipe and retire? Because then Tom Aspinall's the champion by the end of the year because he gets unified then. For me, it's obviously it's Tom Aspinall or John Jones at heavyweight.
Yeah, I can really see it at that because right now they just had Marlon Vera versus Sean O'Malley because they have a very intensity about for those huge UFC fighters. And between Tom Aspinall versus John Bone Jones, I mean, actually, they just ran out to John Jones versus Steve Miocic back in there in New York City, but they just got Tom Aspinall beating out to Sergey Pavlovich at the championship. I mean, that was very huge. And I think that Thomas Pinot, he wants to be like a retain his championship. And of course, he wants to John Bon Jones to the sea because right now, John Bon Jones is winning the Alec White, defining generation for the UFC at the time for the history. But I think Thomas Pinot has sort of gone through for all these championship, and he was one of those fewest England champions who made it through the UFC history. Remember Michael Bisping, also Leon Edwards, and then Tom Aspinall. I mean, it all begins for the championship, the historical moment. And I think that Tom Aspinall, who can be like one of those perfect examples to beat up John Jones at a certain level. And for another thing, which is Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera, I mean, this is like a you cannot stop watching about this fight, not only for the trash talking, but also with the intensity, the speed, and of course the Brazilian jiu-jitsu and everything. I mean, yeah, that kind of like a lot of things that have to go for it. And
Don't
those are the
blink.
things, yes. But there's some of the things for about the championship. I mean, that's a very good impact of all those between for the 2024. So it might be I could go for it.
It's man, it's gonna be a great year. That's what I'll say. If there's any fans who are just getting into MMA, stick with it, please, because MMA is going to be amazing this year. Not even just in the UFC, the PFL Bellator run that's going to be really interesting. February 24th, PFL champion versus Bellator champions. That is going to be really, really interesting to watch and really fun to watch. How what people see is the two second places fighting each other. You know, the two second place divisions. Which one is the best in or the second best, shall we say, behind the UFC. 2024 is going to be an amazing year, and it's February now, and we're already off to a hot start with two new champions. Raquel Pennington beat Marueno Silva as well. Yeah, it's going to be a great year, man. And I hope you enjoy it too, because I can't wait for some of these
Yeah.
events coming up, man.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, it's been another episode of Let Me Speak with El Capitán Rafucho, as known as Rafael Chacín. So, Patrick McCorry, give us the social media so can people follow you also about your content, some videos. So, give us our every thoughts, last thoughts.
All right, man. I really appreciate you letting me be on here. You can find me on Instagram at Patrick McCorry Sports Show and on Twitter at Patrick_McCorry. I post interviews on my own channel and on Cageside Press and Combat Sports K for two other channels. And I travel a lot and I'm covering events, doing press conferences, interviews, and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for fight week coverage, posts of knockouts that I enjoy, interviews with fighters on fight week, press conferences, and articles is something I'm really getting into writing. I really enjoy writing. So if you're looking for just around the clock coverage and so much different content, I would really appreciate it if you checked my stuff out and gave me a follow. If you don't like me, fine, because there's other people that watch this and will like me. So I appreciate the time. And yeah, follow Rafael as well, because he is an awesome guy for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Capitán Rafucho, also on Instagram and YouTube, also Rafael Chacín, because they're everywhere on the social media. It has been like a great pleasure to have you as a special guest right here talking about for UFC, MMAs. It's been another episode of Let Me Speak with Rafael Chacín, as known as El Capitán Rafucho, and I will see you there with another episode. So I will see you there. Have a great day, and of course, salute to you. So There you go. All right.